Labor's said that we're supportive of an international inquiry of this nature. We think it's important that we get to the bottom of what's going on, and I think countries need to be open, upfront, cooperative with the inquiry. So it's an important step forward.
But Labor was critical about the way the government was doing this. It's now been effective.
I think there were some concerns about particularly having relationships with neighbours or countries in our region being managed largely through some hawks on the backbench, as opposed to making sure that we're taking every step very carefully, and those steps not being able to be challenged necessarily. While there have been some concerns raised initially, I think it's, as I've said to you earlier in this discussion, Labor has been supportive of an international inquiry and remains so.
And if China's reaction from this push and the way this has happened is to punish any particular country, including Australia, is the onus on China to explain that, or to in fact not do it, rather than blaming the coalition government?
Well, I mean, we've certainly had the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister both say that recent actions weren't in response to Australia's push on this. So, you take them obviously at their word. We have a trade issue that needs to be dealt with, quite quickly. A lot of jobs, a lot of firms are reliant on that trade. A lot of states reliant on strong trade. For example, in WA, I'm led to believe, based on the comments of Alana McTiernan, a minister and former colleague of ours, that 1 in 4 jobs in WA are dependent on trade, particularly through China. So, it's something that has to be dealt with seriously, Tom.
When you have talk about this relationship and who's badly managing it or otherwise, when you have the counterparts, the effective ministers, those colleagues of, or the counterparts of Simon Birmingham and David Littleproud, not even picking up the phone, not even returning calls, isn't it the Chinese Communist Party that's managing this relationship badly? Isn't that a petty way to handle things?
I think people would expect on both sides of this that people in leadership positions, in key positions that manage this relationship, doing so in a way that gets to the bottom of things as quickly as possible. And I do think it's really bad that, our ministers have not had responses back from their counterparts. And if we are to sort this out quickly, that should definitely happen.
I want to ask you about interesting headline today about Scott Morrison, perhaps, and I'll paraphrase here, doing a Bob Hawke, bringing together industry, employers, workers as well as unions. He's got a fair bit of popularity at the moment around the country, Scott Morrison. Is this a good step? Would Labor welcome it?
You know what? I absolutely do welcome it, because it's the type of thing that should happen more regularly. We should be bringing together people who've got an interest in the economy and making sure that that economy delivers for as many people as possible. That absolutely is a no-brainer. But having said that, this has not been the track record of this government. I mean, if you want to look at past history, where they have, brought people together and sought to have them work cohesively, look at what happened, for example, with the National Energy Guarantee, where, you had a lot of people from within industry and states all clamouring to get this thing done, and it fell apart because of people within the coalition party room who didn't want to see that level of cooperation. So I absolutely agree we should find ways longer term to work together. We shouldn't use ideology to divide people off into camps and refuse to deal with them, as has been the case in the recent past. And we should ensure that at the federal level, that the coalition's party room does not basically put a spike in any effort to achieve that. So, yep, absolutely it should happen, but let's see if it does.
Well, we will see, perhaps, the new spirit of working together, how long that does last. Just finally on the government support for industry, they're talking about what they are doing in these times, in particular for contractors, so any sort of company that gets contract work for the government, much quicker payments. We know how much cash flow is an issue right now, and avoiding terminating contracts even when they have the right to. Do you welcome that?
I think this is a really important thing. Businesses want to see their bills paid quickly, particularly at times where cash flow is constrained, Tom. So some of the stuff that's been announced by the federal government, particularly Matthias Cormann as Finance Minister in the last week, does sound very positive. But I've got to say I'm absolutely stunned that when it comes to providing support for industry at a time where the economy has stalled because of current events, where people are concerned about jobs, where government had an ideal opportunity to support industry, particularly our tech sector, and getting them to get involved in supporting the COVID Safe Act. When the government had the choice to do it, they didn't choose local, they chose overseas. And they chose an overseas multinational in Amazon Web Services at that. Amazon does great work, but I don't think they should handle sensitive data. And I think Australians believe the data generated by Australians should be held by Australian firms on Australian soil, where those firms are quite capable of doing that work, and the government has already said they're capable of doing that work.
Was there a specific company with that capability? We're nearly out of time, but are you putting up a particular company that could have done that job?
I can list 4 Australian cloud services firms, going from AU Cloud, Slice Tech, Macquarie Telecom, Volt, who all do a lot of work for government and were completely overlooked for this contract. 3 of those firms are on the protected list, that is, that they're capable of handling very sensitive data and handle major contracts, some of which are with defence. Why didn't the Australian government back Australian business? You know, it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it, and they absolutely treated Australian industry shabbily on that. And I think there are also questions that remain about whether or not the US government will, because they've got the ability under their law, regardless of where the data is held on the planet, to reach in and get data if it's held by an American firm. The Australian government says that'll be illegal, but I bet in a dispute, they're not really going to take on the US government if it does that. I think it's just wrong, and we missed a great opportunity to support great Australian businesses and great Australian jobs.